Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Battle Styles, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we are traveling back in time, all the way to 2004 to look at the top 10 decks of the 04 Worlds format. That is to say, it's Expedition all the way up to Hidden Legends. So it's in a really interesting time capsule where you get the last three e-reader sets of the Wizards of the Coast era, and you get the new sort of influx of cards from the Ruby Sapphire era on, where Pokemon take over and really change the game with a lot of powerful and different effects. Two cards that we'd previously seen from the Wizards of the Coast stuff. There is some still really important cards from these three early sets, especially some supporter cards and stuff like that, that really do help out some engines, but the Pokemon power level really does creep up a lot more when you get into the Ruby Sapphire on set. So a really, really interesting meta. I'm by no means an expert in this meta. I have really had like a 2 or 3 week sort of intensive crash course for this era, and I've played a number of games on TCG1 as well with a number of these decks. So I have my own personal thoughts. I'm obviously going back to that 2004, looking at the results of the World's Tournament, looking at a ton of different sources around, and I'll go over those in a moment if you want to gain some experience in here as well. But this is going to be somewhat my opinion at the same time, so do take it with a pinch of salt, and let me know if there are any decks that were missed off this top 10 list, or ones that you're looking to play in a tournament upcoming, because that is the reason for this video, in why I'm doing it today. It's because Jay Horan has just announced his Winnerbox tournament that's going to be taking place on the 29th of May on a Saturday, and it's a you can win a box of Battle Styles playing in an 04 tournament, which I think is really fun. 04 is a really interesting format, and we'll talk more about the nuances as we go through the video, I'm sure. But yeah, just a really fun thing to get involved with. It's, the first ever official Worlds was in 04. So I'm hoping this will be a kickstart for me doing a sort of updated throwback top 10 decks for each year of Worlds, because it's really interesting how things can change now that we have hindsight on our side. A lot of these deck lists won't be the same way they were back in 04. A lot of the, even the World's winning deck lists, people can look back at the time and see, with all this context now, the game is, 15 years on or 16 years on at this point. We have a lot more experience in what makes decks consistent, what makes things work, all that sort of stuff. I'm not saying people were complete novices going to Worlds in 04, but things are very different now, and the way we analyze metagames and stuff certainly has changed in a big way. So this may not be a list you're necessarily expecting, and a lot of things has, come out as people have tested this format more and gone back to it over the years. So it's by no means the fully discovered format, and there's just not many people who have the attention span to go deep into a format that's now over 15 years old. But if you do, you can get a nice booster box reward and show off your skill in this 04 format. And if anyone has been playing for that long, congratulations to you for sticking with Pokemon all this time. And yeah, hopefully this will be fun for you. So quickly, just a reminder of the 04 format. The player going first, whoever wins the coin flip must go first. They can't draw a card to start their turn, and they also can't play supporters on his or her first turn. So yeah, it's a small card disadvantage, but you do get the first attachment. You can play your item cards. You can play rare candy even, because it's pre-errata rare candy, where you can use it on Pokemon coming into play on that turn. You can use it on basics going into stage ones as well. So rare candy is much better. Item cards are just good in general that can be played. You can get your first energy drop down, and you can attack as well, which is one of the reasons why Dunsparce is such a powerful engine in the game. So the sources that I've looked at, as well as my own playtesting, is Jason Klaczynski's blog. Also, PTCGarchive.com has a ton of decklist data. They have a nice little breakdown of how the lists were used and the sort of focal points, and sometimes even tech includes that you can have for the most popular decks in 04. Also looking at Jay's Advice YouTube channel, the channel has a ton of not only 04 format, but tons of other year formats, and just a really experienced player that's been around for a long, long time at a very high standard as well. So has some great insight into all sorts of different old format sort of time periods. as well as the Snowpoint Cast YouTube channel as well. A ton of great retro content on there also. So let's talk about what actually happened in the World Championships in 2004. Magma Box was able to win all three age divisions, juniors, masters, and seniors, all taken down by the Team Magma deck, focused around Magma Groudon, using the likes of Camerupt and Claydol to accelerate and manipulate energy attachments whilst having good early aggression with a big basic of all things. Now, evolutions are certainly viable in this format, and more often than not, you will be seeing evolving decks on this top 10. But yeah, the big basic stuff is still certainly valid, and you can have a very aggressive Groudon deck that can be putting a lot of pressure on in the opening turns. So yeah, that was able to win all three age divisions. Blaziken and Gardevoir were really heavily played in this era and respected decks as some of the top decks, and were yeah, just played a lot and also had some good Worlds finishes. Blaziken got second in the Masters division, for example. Gardevoir also had a smuttering of top 4 and top 8 placements across the age divisions as well. So yeah, some of the most hyped stage 2s, I would say. And the other thing to bear in mind is that Dunsparce is the main way that you can flood your board of Pokemon. Delcatty and Magneton is the main backbone of decks just to draw cards. Such a good combination. Delcatty is a discard an energy from hand, draw 3. Magneton allows you to discard any card from hand and get 2 energies back from your discard pile. So it's similar to Starmie, for those of you who remember the evolution Starmie that was paired with Volcanion, so you could steam up a bunch and then Starmie get back those energies and steam up more. The Magneton's the same thing here, but you're basically doing it to maintain attachments throughout the game, but also so you can use your Delcatty essentially for free, which means you have a really strange momentum in this format where once the Delcatty Magneton engine comes online, people grow hand sizes to like 12, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 card hands. But before that, you can be really on fumes. And it's a really strange back and forth where there are huge power spikes based on hitting your Delcatty and Magneton and how quickly you can do that. So there is some RNG here, of course. It can feel strange, but obviously there's only 1 prizes and 2 prize EX Pokemon in this format, so there are a number of turns for you to buy time, and even if you are sacrificing prizes, it can be much more momentum-based than prize race-based, because people can stumble at all different points, because you're playing evolutions, you play specific energy cards, lots of special energies in the format as well. So it's a really interesting puzzle to try and figure out, and at the same time, support engines are really wacky. There are copycats, so maintaining your own hand size to stop your opponent drawing cards at times is important. Steven's Advice, you want to get set up on your side of the field, but the Steven's Advice allows the opponent to draw more if that happens. So there are certainly things to keep in check. So there's a lot of nuance to this format, as well as there being that random element of starting that Dunsparce, finding that Delcatty. Those are the big RNG elements of the meta. Whereas like things like the Groudon deck can just aggressively punish slower starts. That's sort of the thing that you have to bear in mind. So let's start with my top 10. And this isn't just based on Worlds, like I said, this is also based on other people's tier lists, consensus, as well as just some of my own thoughts as I've played through these decks. In at number 10, we have Mewbis, which is Mewtwo EX from Ruby Sapphire, and Gorobis. Gorobis is a very, very strong attacker in this format. One of my favorite cards to actually use in this meta, just full stop really, because it's very flexible, can go into all sorts of different decks thanks to double rainbow energy. It means you can just attach it straight onto your Gorobis to fulfill the Mystic Water attack, which does 20 and 10 more for each psychic energy in play. That's not just your stuff, that's also your opponent's stuff. And many people use multi-energy, double rainbow energy. There's a lot of psychic energy in the meta anyway, because there is Gardevoir, and there's, opposing Gorobis players. You easily one-shot each other in Gorobis mirror matches because you only have 70 hit points, which even in this format is on the lower side. So yeah, Gorobis is really good. Clamperl also just has an awesome ability protecting yourself against like Exploud and that sort of stuff. Spread variant is what Exploud is. But the idea around this list is trying to use the early energy absorption attack from Mewtwo EX to give yourself, again, just high tempo. Psyburn is expensive, but if you can energy absorption to your Mewtwo EX, you can get that rolling pretty quickly and pumping out really, really good damage. And because we play for Warp Point in the deck, you can be trying to target things down on the bench, move their Dunsparce out the way, and hit some of their evolving basic Pokemon, which can be hugely disruptive in those opening turns. It also can just be used to grow your Mystic Water attack. You don't have to be punching with Cyburn. You can Energy Absorption, Warp Point, double Rainbow onto Gorobis, and then your main attacker is online and you have a really good beat stick. Warp Point has great synergy here because you have free retreat with Gorobis as well, so just all round very, very good stuff. The main sort of weaknesses of this deck is that you're not able to play some of the best supporters in the game. You're not playing Stevens and you're not playing Desert Shaman because you're trying to play Juggler and TV Reporter instead to discard cards aggressively. You need to discard your energy cards so you can get the value of energy absorption in the opening stages. You obviously have Delcatty, which can energy draw, but that's at best, like from turn 2, because we're not playing Rare Candy in this deck, of course. So you really want to rely on the Juggler, the TV Reporter, which makes us have an absurd energy count, really. Even in this format, this is a very high energy count. So that's one of the awkward things to bear in mind. And of course, you have a relatively fragile 2-prize Pokemon in Mewtwo EX. It is weak to Psychic. You can be aggressive against Gardevoir, but they can be straight aggressive back to you, and you are giving up 2 prize cards. You only have 100 hit points on a 2-prize Pokemon, which is also quite fragile. So certainly something to bear in mind and be slightly concerned about. But I do like the type coverage here. Having Psychic and Water type coverage in one deck can be really annoying for, again, Blaziken decks. Can be really good against Gardevoir decks as well. Machamp even is on the rogue side of things, but certainly can be good against that. So, Mewbis is my number 10 deck. I just don't think it's quite as consistent as some of the other decks that you can build around Gorobis. So Gorobis will also feature on the top 10 later on. The Mewtwo was just one I wanted to mention because it has quite a different engine than the majority of other Gorobis builds. In at number 9, we actually do have Machamp. I really think this is in an interesting spot in the metagame, actually, because it takes advantage of Victory Bell, which is using Coin Flip Gust, essentially, in a stage 2. Every turn, flip that coin, try and Gust. And Machamp is a fighting type. Fighting types are great in this format because you can be hitting Delcatty and you can be hitting Magneton for weakness and taking easy knockouts on them with Brick Smash, which is really cool. Denying draw from people is very disruptive, and it's not only hitting their draw engine. You can be in the opening stages really hurting your opponent's one sort of evolving Pokemon if they haven't got into their rare candies and that sort of stuff. So I do really like that approach. 120 is relatively bulky for a 1 prize stage 2 in this format, and you are also hitting into EX Pokemon for more damage thanks to your Pokebody, which is good for the amount of EXs that are in the meta, obviously Blaziken being one of the biggest ones. So, yeah, and also Machamp has good weakness into X-Cloud as well, which I think is low-key slept on and wasn't utilized enough in the actual 04 format. I think Machamp being a good check to X-Cloud is actually super important. There's been some recent tournaments where X-Cloud has done very, very well, so Machamp being a soft counter to that is also pretty cool. Your main weakness is that Psychic is a relevant type coverage for sure, so you are a little bit fragile there. You are hoping that Victory Bell is going to help you out, take some easy prizes, stop Gardevoir's draw engine and stuff like that to see yourself through. You do have the Ancient Tomb in here to be a little bit safer as well. And you're playing 4 Desert Shaman here, so you're trying to Gust KO their Delcatty. Desert Shaman is essentially a judge effect, and then in this format, people can brick off that quite a lot. So you're very disruptive, and I do think that this is one of the best abusers of Victory Bell. The Gust that we have in the game in 04 is Victory Bell or Pokemon Reversal. Both of them are coin flip based. And I like this aggressive style approach that you can go for here. A few other things you could think about is giving ourselves a 1-1 Magneton line just to draw more cards throughout the game consistently. And potentially Professor Elm's training to just have additional outs to the Delcatty and your other stuff is always a reasonable option for you. This is quite a streamlined Machamp list. In at number 8, we have Quad Muck. Muck EX has the really annoying Toxic Gas Pokebody. As long as Muck EX is your active, ignore all Poke Powers and bodies other than Toxic Gas. So, again, trying to take advantage of the meta that we are in. A lot of people rely on Delcatty and Magneton to get rolling. You also shut off things like Swampert, things like Blaziken, things like Gardevoir's abilities to stop them manipulating energy cards, essentially, and make it difficult for them to attack. And that's even more so the case when you have your 4 Crushing Hammers, which is Energy Removal 2, the OG version. You have Team Aqua Hideout and a bunch of Pokemon Reversals as well, which can be used for trapping, or they can be used just for bringing something up so you can start putting damage onto them before your opponent is ready to attack. So you are really low maintenance here. You're only playing the mucks, so you are trying to establish the toxic gas straight away, keep that in play the entire game, stop them from ever using a body, and in many situations when you are using things like Desert Shaman, you only need a grass energy attached to your muck. Your opponent is then going to be scrambling around for things to do the entire time. And yeah, Poison Breath is actually decent pressure. The Slimy Water attack as well can do a good amount, especially with the Aqua Hideout in here bumping up that retreat cost. So really easy to play deck in many ways because you're one-tricking most of the time. You just say, let me get muck into play, let me be annoying. This is kind of like the OG, well, not really the OG, but in 2004, this was pretty much our best option. I think this sort of approach got way better when Metacham came out later on in the EX era, but Muck was one of the first ways that you could play a quad-based build. And yeah, it's super annoying and just works all the time, basically, because you have a lot of search for the Muck. You have the 4 physical copies, then you have the 4 fastballs, which can only get you Muck, which gives you a lot of good options here. I think the weaknesses really is that your damage output is low, and if your opponent does just high roll and power spike the supporter cards without the need of Delcatis and Magnetons, or if they just hit that early rare candy anyway, they're going to start beat sticking you down, which is quite awkward. In at number 7, we have Shiftry. Shiftry is, again, a pretty strong one prize attacking stage 2. That supernatural power does 40, and if you have the same number of cards in your opponent's as your opponent does in hand, you do 80 damage. This is really good damage output, especially for a potential boost energy, 1 attachment. So you can have huge burst potential going on in your deck. You also have the really nice resistance of Psychic, which is very, very relevant in the game. Again, I'm going to harp back to Gardevoir, I'm going to harp back to like Mewtwo and stuff like that. You really want to have this resistance. The fighting weakness is certainly awkward. We've already spoken about the champ, but the bigger thing to be concerned about is Team Magma's Groudon, of course. So having that weakness is certainly a downside here. But you try and make up for it with just raw damage output that the Shiftry can have with, like I said, the supernatural power can be nice. Push aside as well, looks at your opponent's hand, choose a basic or evolution, and it puts it to the bottom of their deck. So actually is quite disruptive. Can potentially, if you can cheese this early enough, get your opponent out of their Delcatis, out of their Magnetons, and just stopping their chain of evolution in general. Whilst at the same time, 30 sounds like bad pressure, but you have Darkness Energies on top, Special Darks, which increase that quite substantially. So again, I'm opting to play Victreebel here as well, because you can quite easily just get that heads flip, and you can be aggressively taking out things that your opponent's building up in the back, which is always a big deal. When you have nice burst potential damage-wise, it's really good to take advantage of that with Gust. So I think that's one of the main things I want to focus on here, because you can one-attach, knock out Delcatis and Magnetons and that sort of thing. So it is slightly on the greedy side. This could be a Blossom instead for healing, potentially, but I don't think this is like the tankiest deck available. So we do play a Pokemon Nurse anyway, so maybe you can try and weave that in. Briny Compassion also could be subbed in over the Nurse, because if you are leaning into those boost energies, you can just pick up your Shiftry for no downside. But outside of that, this is kind of like the cookie cutter engine that you see from most Stage 2 decks, where you have your Magneton, you have your Delcatty, you have your Dunsparce, you have your Stage 2, and then you either play like Blossom or Victreebel. More people play Blossom. Not always in Shiftry. I think more people play Victreebel in Shiftry, but yeah, and then you have just the best supporters available, the Oracles to synergize with the Delcatty, that sort of thing. So you'll see this sort of copy-paste of the support accounts, the engine in terms of Delcatty, Magneton, throughout many of the Stage 2 decks. So yeah, I think this is certainly reasonable. You do have the Grass Energies to use to attack with the Victreebel, which is pretty decent. You can obviously attack with your Nuzleaf as well, which can give yourself some weakness back against the Groudon, so that's not to be slept on. Just a few things to bear in mind here. Weaknesses, yeah, like I said, you don't want to run into Groudon, and matching hand sizes means that you don't always have the optimal turns. Sometimes you don't put down that extra C-Dot, you don't evolve into a Nuzleaf, you don't attach for turn, because you're always trying to match your opponent, and they have some control over what you're doing. And also, it means that you're not at full capacity if your opponent is drawing better than you. They get into their Delcatty and Magneton first, they get substantially larger hand sizes than you, and you don't always have the copycat follow-up. You don't always... Yeah, you're not always able to get the full supernatural power off, which is the big downside of Shiftry. In at number 6, we have Krobis. This is, I think, the strongest way to play Gorobis. like I said, this is one of my favorite cards. I think if I'm playing this tournament, I'm probably going to play some sort of Gorobus variant, just throwing it out there. So 6 is a bit of a, I don't know, it's a strange spot to put it. I think because you don't play Delcatty Magneton, I can't put it much higher on the list because you can just have these bricky games where you're not really doing much. But the power and the pace of Gorobus is certainly tempting. You also have great type coverage. You have grass typing in here as well as water type coverage. The Crobat being great cover for you, which I think is really nice. All of the Zubat, Golbat, and Crobat have disruptive, annoying attacks, and they're both quite efficient, and they naturally have free retreat. So the deck almost has entirely free retreat outside of Dunsparce, which is really cool. Means you can take good advantage of the warp points. And yeah, I just really like Gorobus. I think it's a really, really strong card in this meta. And yeah, you don't need much to get going, which is always really good. Like I said, the only real downside is that your tankiest Pokemon is only 90 hit points, so many things can churn and burn through you. You're just hoping that you get ahead in the race, really, out the gates. And if that doesn't happen, you don't have many tricks to pull yourself back outside of sudden flashes, confusions from Golbat, that sort of stuff. You could think about adding in grass energies if you wanted to. You can also think about ancient TM Rock. What else is there? There's, like I said, at the bottom, you can just see Banette, Beedrill, Medicham. These are just some options that you could play instead of the Golbat. The Golbat is basically the most flexible card in the deck, or like, it's a lot of spaces, right? But these could be inserted into other things. I've personally loved trying a Beedrill package in here because Paralysis can buy yourself so many turns in this format where many of the Stage 2 decks only have space for like one rope, one warp point maximum. And a lot of them play Nurse over Mr. Briney's, so Paralysis sticks like a lot. So I low-key like really love Beedrill in this format. Banette also just good in like mirror match situations, and many decks play special energies that you can capitalize on, and it gives you a third type coverage in the deck. Medicham equally gives you an extra type coverage, certainly can be good against, again, Delcatty Magneton engines, where they are rolling. You're going to punish them for that, for having large hand sizes. So all of these sorts of stage 1 rush approaches are also very solid with Gorobus. I've also seen Lantern even with some of these builds where you just retain energies in play that little bit better. I have seen Gorobus with all sorts. I've seen it with Metagross. I've seen it with Gardevoir. It's just such a powerful beat stick, realistically, for the early tempo that you get, that I wouldn't be surprised if Gorobus did well in many renditions, because the card is just in a vacuum very, very solid. So let's move on from Gorobus now. And let's start looking at some more Stage 2s. Let's look at Swampert. Swampert was quite a popular archetype back in 04. Did get some decent results, I believe, in some of the lower age divisions. And I think it's certainly a solid deck. You've got the core of Magneton Delcatty, which just has great synergy for you. Magnetic Field gets even more value. That's why you see a thicker line here than in some other builds that we've seen so far, because it works with your regular Swampert so well with that Water Call. You've got the Blossom in here for extra type coverage. Your weaknesses that you could be hitting. You could be hitting for Fighting Weakness, which is solid. You can be hitting for Water Weakness, which is solid, of course, as well. Your weaknesses to Grass, which can be awkward. I mean, Sceptile's a thing, Vileplume's a thing. There are a few grass attacking Pokemon in the format, obviously Crobat being one of the bigger ones that sort of popped up in Krobus. And a lot of people just naturally play Blossom in their deck. A lot of the counter stage 2s will be playing their own Blossom, but they're normally quite difficult to get powered up anyway in the first place, so it's something that you can manage. I really like Swampert because it scales with Hydro Pump quite aggressively, and also having that sniping option with discard of energy can put your opponent back tempo-wise as well. So I think this has a lot going for it. I just think it's slightly more to set up than some of the other things. Like, I feel Swampert EX doesn't just completely start beating down your opponents in the same way that a Blaziken EX does if you just high roll a rare candy on turn 2. Whereas I feel like the Blaziken is much more likely to start like just bopping people quickly. And a similar thing can be said for the Gardevoir EX if your opponent's hand is right, or if you run into your boost energies early. So I think you always need to get double stage 2s up, which means you're normally just behind some of the other stage 2 decks in terms of tempo. That's the main reason that I'm not putting Swampert high on the list. But that said, you're hitting some of the best weaknesses in the game, and you have good snipe coverage in here as well. I think the 04 Worlds deck list, because this actually got printed as one of the decks, was playing a Suicune EX as like a card that can just come in as a basic, so you don't need to have those double stage 2s online, which can certainly be okay. I don't think its attacks are necessarily strong enough to support this sort of deck, but it can have some upsides just for, again, burst potential. Wob effect can be used to buy yourself time. If you are playing Wob, you probably need to play Psychic Energy or additional multis. and Ditto can be used to, again, copy some nice attacks. And Shaman is always a reasonable card just for hand disruption, which we're not playing right now in the list. In number 4, we have X-Cloud. I think X-Cloud is a super duper cool archetype, and I think was grossly underutilized in the Worlds 04 metagame. Obviously, it was hyped alongside Shiftry. These were both new cards from Hidden Legends at the time. And they both had fighting weakness, so I can see why X-Cloud didn't, make it to the end game of Worlds in 04, because Groudon was on the scene in heavy presence from the Japanese side. That was like their sort of team secret deck, and it ended up doing extremely well. So I can see why X-Cloud fell back in the day, but I think nowadays the format is kind of more diverse. There's easily more than like 15 viable decks in 04. And X-Cloud is very good against a lot of things that aren't hitting you for weakness, which is really, really good, because you basically build around Breaking Sound, which is just a 1 energy attack cost doing a 10 spread. Sounds very simple, but it's super duper effective when there's so many low hit point things around. There's Magnetons, there's Delcatties, there's Dunsparce, there's all sorts of evolving Pokemon around that you get those spreads off very, very effectively. There's tons of stage 2s that are trying to rare candy up, and you have 3 copies of Ancient Technical Machine Rock to pick them up into your opponent's hand and take a ton of prizes all at once. That's the main idea here. You are also playing boosts, so you can Hyper Voice through things and also use Thunderous Roar to confuse at the same time, just for a little chip damage. But remember, you don't care about big damage with this deck. You only care about chip damage and buying turns. Using confusion strats, if it buys you a turn, it's fantastic for you. You've got 4 Brini's Compassion as well. 3 Brini's Compassion to try and pick up your X-Cloud and remove a ton of damage. And anything that's not hitting for fighting weakness finds it very difficult to hit that 120. So X-Cloud is very, very good for that. And I feel I've seen it done. It's done well in a recent 04 tournament. I think the deck is very solid. That list that did well was actually playing Beedrill. Again, a card that I do really like, because Paralysis is just very strong in this format right now. It does make you warp your deck a bit more. You need to have more switch outs and stuff like that, more than just the Brinies, I think. And you also have to eat into your consistency considerably, which is kind of questionable. But I think just the core of X-Clouds and the win condition, just because ATM Rock is just such a good card that you can take advantage of, that, yeah, the spread is real, and I think it's quite dangerous in 04. In number 3, we have Magma Box. I'm sure a lot of you were expecting me to put this at number 1, but as I've played more of this format, I've realized that a few things have happened since 04. Obviously, the deck is far more respected now, so it's more teched for in the 2021 meta of the 04 format. A lot more decks play Blossom, which gives decks better type coverage, as well as better healing for your aggressive linear attack approaches, so they can make your Pulverize much less dangerous. And in general, there's just a lot less greed in lists. I think that's one thing you have to remember about Magma Box, is that it's really a rush beatdown style deck. It doesn't have the best traits available to it. It doesn't have the highest damage output. You're trying to get on the board early with aggressive linear attack damage, using darkness energies, trying to, deal with Delcatties, trying to deal with Dunsparce in the early stages, just hit your type coverage quite nicely. Because again, like I was saying with Machamp, fighting is really good typing. And if you are, spreading onto Torchics, onto Mudkips, onto Ralts, those sorts of Pokemon, the Pulverize becomes really good damage output. And you have the Camerupt and the Claydol in the back to give yourself more type coverage. You can have Fire type coverage and Psychic type coverage. The Claydol being huge, actually, for the Gardevoir matchup, of course. And Camerupt being an answer, potentially, to Blossom now, which is something to bear in mind. And a few other things out here as well. That you do have good typing, of course. And the combination of Magma Switch and Overheat gives you a lot of energy to spread around. But I feel like the deck doesn't have a draw engine, and I've felt that so many times that I've played this deck, that the deck fizzles like quite often. If you don't get your Stevens into Stevens, basically, or if you don't steal a big copycat in the game, you can certainly fizzle in a lot of situations. So I feel like the deck isn't super duper robust, and as the format has been more figured out by people have basically streamlined all the other decks in the format, essentially, to A, tech for Groudon, and B, just play less sort of dead weight that was being played in 04. That's what made this deck so good, was because it was more streamlined than these other decks and more aggressive. Just essentially hit you first and really just got on the board quickly with early attachments, essentially. And I think that strategy is still valid and is still strong and will still steal a ton of games. This is best of one tournament, by the way, the tournament that I'm talking about that is happening in May. and you will still take a lot of wins just because of that early aggression from Groudon, just dealing with an early Skitty or a Magnemite that's just stuck in play on the opening turns, your opponents draw passing, which does just happen at times. So I don't fault that, but I just don't think it's the number one best deck anymore. It doesn't have the right fundamentals, I think, to become a number one deck in the game, because you don't have that draw engine to rely on, which I think is just the best elements of 04 is that you can just abuse Delcatty Magneton. That's my personal opinion. So that means we're actually looking at evolutions for the second and first place lists. For me, Gardevoir is the second best deck in 2004. It has great disruption because you can essentially keep your opponent at a low hand size if they're afraid of your damage output. And you can also keep your opponents in check in terms of their hand attachments, again, because they're scared of damage. Either they don't care and get knockouts and your damage becomes absurd, or they do care, you're disrupting them the whole time, and yeah, they're just not having the ideal board state. So this Gardevoir EX, very, very nice. That feedback attack can really, again, be really disruptive for your opponents if they are using their own Delcatty Magneton engine, and Psystorm, very aggressive with the attachments. You can just spam all over the board. You have burst potential with the boost energy. You have your regular Gardevoir that's getting you energies throughout the entire game. So yeah, just very solid game plan overall. Great damage output. Good typing as well, or relatively good typing. I do think Psychic weakness can be abused, and that Grass weakness is annoying with Crobat in the format, and Blossom as well. But yeah, just in general, very solid game plan. Is again a great abuser of Magneton, because you can just get those energies out of the deck with the Gardevoir, and then you can start recurring them with the Magneton quite easily. You naturally thin the deck quite quickly with the Gardevoir. You are putting damage on your stuff, which can be a little bit awkward against things like Groudon, so something to bear in mind. But overall, I think this deck is just very, very strong. Desert Shaman's certainly a card I would think about. It has natural anti-synergy with feedback, but it can be disruptive, especially if your opponent is choosing to hold back on cards with feedback, because they want to stay out of a KO range, basically. And then you can drop the Desert Shaman on them, and then suddenly they need like 5 combo pieces that they were holding on to, waiting for the right time, and then you sort of spring the trap with a Desert Shaman. So I could see that coming in. It seems like it has anti-synergy, but board-wise, it actually can really work. Magnetic Storm can be nice as a stadium bounce if you really want to, especially for Desert Ruins, and Warp Point could be an additional switch out, and also potentially, push things like Dunsparce out the way for more aggressive prize cards and hurt your opponent's setup. That's certainly something that you can think about. But yes, in at number 1, I have Blaziken. I think Blaziken is just the most well-rounded deck in 2004. It has the best inherent synergy with Delcatty Magneton, I feel, because you have that Flare Starter that can reload so easily immediately after energy drawing all the time. You have good burst potential with Rayquaza EX, which can be a good late-game beat stick that can just get through opposing EX Pokemon, which is a very strong burst of damage. Even if it is just a one-use kind of deal, it's still very useful. It has a great resist as well. It can really help out against things like Swampert. So yeah, very good card in general. You have the Blossom in here to heal up stuff and give you some good type coverage into Magma decks in general. And really, I just think it's the best ability that you can be abusing in 2004. The Fire Starter, especially if you get 2 online, you have a huge strike potential from Volcanic Ash. You have early game aggression from Blaze Kick, and even from the Fire Stream attack. Just a ton of good early aggression on the board, and in general, it feels like the strongest deck to me. You can think about having Aqua's Manectric instead of Magneton as a 1-1 line. That's actually what was played in the second place 04 list, but I feel Magneton is slightly more well-rounded than Manectric. The Manectric allows you to chain Volcanic Ash that little bit more, but Magneton's just going to help you draw more cards in general, I would say. So let's stick to that guy, and it means that you don't miss turn attachments as well throughout the entire game, which is also important. Again, you can think about Desert Shaman in some of these stage 2 decks for a little bit of disruption. Elm Straming method over potentially a Friend Ball could be an option. Friend Ball is basically me saying that I think everyone else should be playing Delcatty and Magneton, and obviously a ton of decks play Dunsparce, and even the ones that don't, things like the Magma deck, they play Zangoose anyway, so Friend Ball is almost always live. Really, really solid item card. That could be an Elm instead, potentially. And Warp Energy is often used so you can move like a Blaziken EX to the back, so then you can Fire Starter to other things or back to itself, that sort of stuff. So those are more switch outs are certainly things I've thought about in the deck overall. But yeah, that's Blaziken for you. Great beat stick, great snipe potential, which is obviously disruptive at the same time because you can stop people drawing with Delcatty. You can deal with opposing like Blossoms for stopping them healing. You can deal with their setup Pokemon in general, like their Gardevoirs, their Blaziken, that sort of stuff. Trying to provide supports in the back. So yeah, very aggressive card in general. So outside the top 10, that's like a huge wave of information for you guys. Hopefully you were able to follow it along the way. And let me know down below if anything wasn't clear around this top 10 list. I'm hoping this has given you some good context if you are looking to play in this 04 style tournament. I do think that, it's end of May, so there's enough time for you guys to go on to TCG 1 yourselves and start playing some of this format to get more to grips with it, because I do think it's a lot of fun. Hopefully I piqued your curiosity for this tournament. And yeah, if there's something that I didn't mention, maybe it was on this slide. These are all some other contenders that I would certainly think about. Walrein is trying to flip coins to prevent attacks, and it has inbuilt acceleration and obviously decent type coverage. Vileplume Sceptile is an archetype that has to dodge fire, which makes me very nervous, and that's the only reason it wasn't on my top 10. But grass type coverage is still good against the Magma deck, and it is one of the most scary healing and it feels very Exodia to me, to be honest, where you get the Vileplume, the Blossom, and the Sceptile all online. It's almost like a stall deck, and it's really difficult to play against, and a lot of decks just don't have the damage output to actually beat that. Beedrill is my fan favorite. I'm probably going to be using Beedrill in this tournament because I think Paralysis is just low-key bonkers in this event. And in general, you get to flip some coins as well for potential huge upside, and grass typing again is pretty handy. Medicham Lantern can be used alongside Gorobis and some other sort of stage 1 boxy Pokemon. I think these are very reasonable in the format. Werelord is a really big tank, and you can use fossils to sort of buy yourself time while you attach a ridiculous amount of energies to this Werelord one by one. And yeah, that's pretty fun. Metagross can be also used alongside Gorobis, and I've even seen spicy Registeel EX builds as well. So yeah, hopefully that covers the format quite well. Let me know if you have any questions about it. Are you going to be joining this tournament? Do you disagree with the list? Were you playing in 04? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. I hope this has given you a good insight into the 04 meta. Let me know if you'll also like to see me go over a sort of retrospective top 10 of the other years of Worlds. I've only been attending Worlds since 2016, so plenty more research for me to go. The rabbit hole is there, and I'm jumping straight into it. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.